Quote, "No Philippine history can be complete without a study of Muslim development," unquote. This is according to Professor Renato Constantino in his book entitled A History of the Philippines, from the Spanish colonization to the Second World War. For us ordinary citizens, we often ask ourselves, how come we're identified as Filipinos? Aren't we curious about the diverse culture, traditions, beliefs, and languages of over 170 dialects that characterize this archipelago? Yet, despite the differences, where are the commonalities? How can we say to ourselves, I am a true Filipino? Who are we? How did we live before the arrival of Western colonizers? Where was our place of origin? These are but a few questions that we seek to address. My name is Juni Gamboa. Please join us in this documentary film entitled The Call of Our Forefathers, a brief history of Islam in the Philippines. In 1925, Professor Henry Oatley Bayer, head of the Anthropology Department at the University of the Philippines, conceived what would popularly be known as the theory of migration. And this was widely accepted by scholars for several decades.
Yung teorya ng migration sa Pilipinas ay marami ang gumawa nito. Isa na si H. Oatley Bayer. Tapos meron din sarili si Robert Fox, si F. Landau Cano, of course si Evangelista, and now si Peter Bellwood, Dr. Peter Bellwood, whom I work with. Kasama ko si Bellwood na naghukay sa Batanes. The earliest theory na pinropose ni H. Oatley Bayer, migration theory, diffusionist. At ang sinasabi niya, merong 3 waves of migration nga na galing sa south from the Java man. Inisip niya na yung Java man, which is a Homo erectus, lumakad through land bridges sa Pilipinas. At kasabay nito yung mga megafauna tulad ng elephas, stegodon, giant turtle, rhinoceros, naglakad din through land bridges.
Bayer's long years of archaeological research dwelt on retrieving facts of past cultures in the islands, mainly from artifacts, bones, and other remains. His findings shed light on the cultural, political, economic existence, and even the beliefs of people. Other scientists who also did some research on the subject stir some doubts on Bayer's assumption, claiming that it was flawed by inadequate evidences, dubious methodology, and pure speculation.
Pero ito ay hindi na napatunayan bandang huli. Hindi naman pala tayo connected ng land bridges between China and Indonesia sa Pilipinas. It was very late kung magkakaroon man ng land bridge dito lang sa bandang Palawan at Borneo. Ito yung dumating na si Robert Fox, nakita yung Tabon Man. Doon sa Tabon Man, may posibilidad talaga na naglakad siya from Borneo, Sabah, to Palawan.
Angel Bautista, acting assistant director of the National Museum of the Philippines, explains in general the development of archaeological studies in the country.
Ang pag-uusapan natin ay yung Philippine cultural chronology, ibig sabihin yung periodization ng ating cultural periods dito sa Pilipinas. At may 4 na proponents na very popular in the field ng Philippine archaeology. Sila si Professor Otley Bayer, nandiyan si Dr. Fox, si Dr. Hocano, at si Dr. Solheim. So, based dun sa mga studies nila, si Otley Bayer ay nagsabi regarding migration. Sinabi rin niya ni Dr. Solheim and also Dr. Fox. So, basically, pwede nating ma-divide ang cultural chronology based dun sa mga studies nila into Paleolithic, Neolithic, Metal Age, Age of Trade, at Historic Period. So ito yung 5 basic cultural chronology ng Pilipinas.
The pre-Islamic social structure was not as rigid as that of the caste system of India, where no one was allowed to leave the caste into which he was born. It has 3 classes. First are the datus, or the chieftain. The word datu was both a political function and social status that extended to the incumbent ruler and all members of the ruling elite. Generally, the right to rule depends on direct descent from the ruling class. Second are the commoners, or citizens. A commoner could become a datu if he displays exceptional bravery or victory in war. Last are the slaves. A slave could buy off his or her liberty by paying a stipulated amount.
Nalalaman natin ang social stratification based doon sa mga burial sites, no? Especially about 1,000 years ago hanggang 14th century. Ma-stratify natin o malalaman natin ang social stratification based doon sa mga goods associated sa burial. So, for example, sa Butuan, may nakikita dyan ng mga burial sites na may mga dug-out coffins, and dug-out coffins, merong iba ay may cranial reformation. Yung cranial reformation was a cultural practice in the past. Ang main objective was to deform the frontal bone and the backbone of the skull. So, to make them different. And these skeletons na may mga deformed skull ay associated sa mga precious objects like tradeware ceramics, even gold implements, gold objects, and also some precious belongings ng tao. So nasa coffin sila. But there are also evidences na yung ordinary na binabalot lang ng banig, there is an evidence doon sa Butuan, pero ang skull niya is normal. So may social stratification na about 1,000 years ago hanggang 14th century.
The economy was based primarily on agriculture and trade, although weaving, pottery making, blacksmithing, and fishing were also prevalent. Slash and burn, or swidden farming, was popular in the uplands, especially in the dry season.
During that period, mga 14th century, no, ang way of life nila is primarily dito sa mga coastal areas, actually trading. Especially dito sa Mindanao and also in Visayas and also even in Manila. So primarily trading. Pero based doon naman sa evidences, naghahunt pa rin sila kasi doon sa mga archaeological o zooarchaeological na nakukuha namin, may nakukuha kaming mga buto ng mga deer. So they are also involved in hunting. Yung primarily cultivation, kasi ito rin ang isa sa mga characteristic ng Age of Trade, yung cultivation. Walang masyadong evidence ang cultivation of plants and even animals. Mostly mga wild pa, so they involved in hunting and trading and food gathering.
In commerce, the barter system was in use, for money was not invented.
About 1,000 years ago, ito na yung Age of Trade. Meaning, ang Pilipinas ay meron ng mga trade relationship with China, Southeast Asia, katulad ng Vietnam, Thailand, even Cambodia, and other countries, Indonesia and Malaysia. And Brunei, of course.
Before the advent of Islam, the people of Mindanao and Sulu were polytheistic animists. They worshipped stones and stars, moons, and other inanimate objects. Also, the Diwatas and Anitos were essential features of their belief system.
Sa Mindanao, meron tayong mga anthropomorphic pottery, yung mga may hugis ng mukha ng tao na ginagawang jar burial. Isa ito na nagbibigay sa atin ng direct evidence ng kanilang ritual at paniniwala. Religion na ito ang pinag-uusapan. So maaga, ang evidence directly linking to religion and afterlife na ang practice nito ay secondary burial ang tawag. Yung primary burial, yung libing ng mga tao, yung buong kadaver at pag nag-disintegrate ito, kinukuha yung bones, inililipat sa jars or any other vessel para secondary burial. Kung marami namang individuals ang inilipat, multiple secondary burial din yun sa isang jar. So ito yung practice na nakikita natin na ang masasabi natin, this is animistic and sa iba, tawag nila pagan practice. But again, we cannot say that this is a real religion, but a practice, a cultural practice, and a belief system. Pwede rin tawaging religion, kung pwede mong i-push na gano'n. Kasi afterlife belief na yan eh.
The establishment of a writing system in the archipelago predates the arrival of Islam.
Meron ng system of writing na ginagamit ang mga Pilipino at the time. Although, meron na tayong evidence ng writing even during the 900 AD. Pero yun ay nire-represent ang proto-historic period. But when Islam and Christianity were introduced sa Pilipinas, nag-start na.
How did Islam come to the archipelago?
Islam came through two trade routes. One is from the Malay Peninsula itself, and the other is through Indochina, what would correspond to now Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. The evidence for this are stones. This is very well discussed by scholars like Dr. Cesar Mahul of the University of the Philippines and also Dr. Najib Salivi.
There existed during the last quarter of the 13th century, if not earlier, a Muslim settlement or community in Sulu. This probably consisted of foreign traders, some of whom might have married members of the ruling families or even played some political role.
Pag sinabi kasi coming of Islam to the Philippines, we are not talking of an accidental phenomenon, but we are talking of a divinely, provincially guided movement of Islam. So there were Arabs who came here to Southeast Asian Malay group doing trading at that time. And at the same time, when they were trading with people in Malaysia and Indonesia, they were able to establish Islamic principalities and communities and filtered Islamic way of life among the people.
Tuan Masyaika or Tuan Makbalo belonged to this stage. Men like them brought the first elements of Islam, for they were integrated to the indigenous communities, raising with them Muslim families. As mentioned by Dr. Cesar Adib Mahul in support of this theory, a tombstone on the slope of Buddato dating back to 710H, or in the Gregorian calendar, 1310 AD, bore the name of Tuan Makbalo. The existence of such a settlement, the memory of their leading public figures, and a rise to social and political status of the descendants of some such individuals, as in the case of the descendants of Tuan Masyaika, demonstrate that the native population was not only antagonistic to Islam, but was open to it. Such openness explains the conversion to Islam with the arrival of the missionaries in Sulu, an event contemporaneous with the work of other missionaries in Java. It can be estimated to have taken place about the second half of the 14th century.
We assume that, as our ancestors have handed down to us, have narrated to us, Islamization at the time was just the belief in one God, the introduction of monotheism.
In 1380, Sheikh Karimul Makhdum, an Arab missionary, also known as Sharif Auliya, arrived and converted a large number of inhabitants to Islam. Makhdum was responsible for the founding and building of the first mosque in the Philippines at Tubig Indangan, Simunul Island, Tawi-Tawi.
Behind is the first mosque in the Philippines. In 1380, an Arabian missionary named Sheikh Karimul Makhdum landed in this island, which is Simunul. Before he landed, this island named Tumbakang. This Tumbakang is a name of tree that surround the island. When Makhdum landed in this island, he immediately constructed the mosque, which is the oldest and the first mosque in the Philippines. That is in 1380.
This is one of the 4 remaining pillars inside the mosque of Karimul Makhdum, Tubig Indangan, Simunul Island, Tawi-Tawi.
This Anjautan means big people, big person. So if you happen to see the tomb of the Sheikh Karimul, it's almost 8 feet the height of the Sheikh Karimul Makhdum.
The coming of Muslim Malays from Sumatra at the beginning of the 15th century had political implications. This is a stage represented by the coming of Raja Baginda Ali, who brought along with him scholars in religious matters. The existence of a Muslim ruler guarantees the preservation of the work of the propagators and the prestige of the older Muslims. This particular stage saw the establishment of Muslim political institutions, more specifically the Sultanate, under Shariful Hashim by the middle of the 15th century. At this time, Islam spread from the coastal areas to the mountain areas in the interior of the island of Sulu. The acceptance of the Sultanate as a legitimate political institution by the coastal chiefs suggests that Islamic consciousness must have been quite widespread among them. Thus, in this particular stage, organized religious instruction became common.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Ar-Rahmanir-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa
And then later on, Shariful Hashim, the son-in-law of Raja Baginda, established the Sulu Sultanate in 1405. So, with the establishment of the Sulu Sultanate, Islam became the state religion. It is only the time that there was very strong Islamization in the most southern part of the present-day Philippines.
Because Islam did not come only as a religion. You see, there's a difference between religion from the point of view of Muslims and religion from the point of view of non-Muslims. Among Muslims, religion is both a relationship to God and a way of life on earth. So that through Islam, you can organize political system, you can organize economic system, you can organize educational system, and all those that will affect the advancement of the Ummah. You can have all the systems established in the society. And that's why we are saying that Islam is not just a religion, which is actually a relationship of man to God, the Creator, but it is also a way of life.
This is the grave of Raja Baginda Ali, located in Buddatu, Holo. By the beginning of the 16th century, increased contacts, both political and commercial, with other Islamized parts of Malaysia transformed Sulu into an integral part of an expanding Darul Islam in Malaysia.
Sulu was part of Darul Islam in Malaysia, which was commonly referred to as the Brunei Empire. So Sulaiman was here, who was paying taxes to the Brunei Empire in Borneo. And you have in Sulu also. This is collective assistance to each others in defense of the Muslim empire.
At the end of the 16th century and in the first decades of the 17th century, political alliances with neighboring Muslim principalities against the creeping of Western colonization and Christianization, as well as the consistent arrivals of teachers or propagators, further guaranteed the preservation of Islam in Sulu. The coming of Islam in Mindanao is credited to the arrival of Sharif Muhammad Kabungsuan. He was of Arab Malay ancestry and a native Muslim teacher from Johor, Malaysia. He landed first at Malabang in Lanao del Sur in the year 1515 and proceeded to Cotabato. Out of his marriages with the local maidens, he was able to establish the first sultanate of Maguindanao and Buayan, with him as the first sultan. Another tradition, this time from Lanao, speaks of Sharif Alawi, who came possibly by way of Maguindanao to Lanao del Sur up the mouth of Taguluan River in the present-day Misamis Oriental and proceeded afterwards to Bukidnon. There are evidences that indicate that as early as the last years of the 15th century, Islam was already gaining headway in many places in the Philippines. It was carried directly from or via Sulu or Mindanao by propagators, traders, or voyagers from Borneo who settled among the inhabitants of the islands. Aside from Manila, Islam had already gained ground in Batangas, Pampanga, Cagayan, Mindoro, Palawan, Catanduanes, Bonbon in Cebu, Oton in Iloilo, Laguna, and other districts. What is metropolitan Manila today was formerly the stronghold of Islam. Manila was ruled by Raja Sulaiman, Raja Matanda, and Tondo under the rule of Raja Lakandula. Manila was not the only commercial hub having a powerful fort which was built near the mouth of the Pasig River in defense of the territory. It was to the Islamized natives of Manila that the word Moro was first applied by the Spaniards in 1570 to denote those who professed Islam. Originally, the term Moro was derived from the Greek word Mauros, which means dark or brown-skinned. This originally referred to the people of North Africa who were of Berber, Sahawari, and Arab racial mix, and conquered Spain for more than 7 centuries.
The coming of the Spaniards also, coming of Spain, of Christianity to us in Mindanao, the product of the Reconquista. The Muslims in Spain were under the Moors for 900 years, 800 plus, let's say 900 years. So when they expelled the Moors, that's why we are called Moros.
On the other hand, the term Indio first denoted the pagan natives, but was later to include even the Christianized natives. It was only in later years, more specifically in 1578 and after, that the name Moro was generally applied to the Muslims of Mindanao and Sulu.
Later on, when there was a need to refer to, we have these different ethnic groups, ethno-linguistic groups who were converted to Islam. And then later on, there was a need to feel, how do we call the totality of these Muslim groups? We have the Maranao, the Stausu, the Sama, the Yakan, the Kuribugan, the Maguindanao, the Erano, and so on. But when we group them together, what will be their identity? It is there where I think political leaders, sensing that there is a need to have, identity, borrowed the term Moro. Although the term Moro was given by the Spaniards, yes, to refer to the Islamized people of Mindanao. So at the beginning, the term Moro was not really very good because it refers to the pirates. The Spaniards refer them as the Moros are pirates. They are so on and so forth. But later on, contemporary revolutionary leaders like Miswari and so on find the term more, more challenging. The term is more appropriate to the Moros because the Moros, since the time the Spaniards came, have been fighting for the preservation of their independence.
In his journal, Sucesos de las Islas de Filipinas, Antonio de Morga wrote, "A few years before the Spaniards subdued the island of Luzon, certain natives of the island of Borneo began to go to that direction to trade, especially to the settlement of Manila and Tondo, and the inhabitants of one island intermarried with those of the other. Had the Spaniards' coming been delayed longer, that religion would have spread throughout the island and even through the others, and it would have been difficult to remove it." In a lamenting statement, Carmen Guerrero Nakpil said, "It is hard to believe that Manila was once firmly under Muslim heel. Muslims controlled the seat of government, the wealth and the trade up and down the Pasig and around Bai Lake in Batangas, as well as the sea lanes to Mindanao and Borneo. The Muslims were the ruling class in Luzon, the rich traders, cultural leaders, and missionaries, the ones with the know-how and the right connections, the literacy, and what's more, the right religion."
It is much better during that time rather than today, because they were masters of their own. The sultanates, the Patapangampong Coronao, were existing as political entities, and they know of any higher master except themselves. And even in terms of economic, they are better off, because in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, they control the international trade. But now, somebody is deciding for us. It is new. It's the new colonizer in Manila, what we call now, correctly or wrongly, Imperial Manila. So I would say, with very much clarity, that the lives of the Moros during those times is better than their lives today.
Robert Day McAmis, in his book Malay Muslims, The History and Challenge of Resurgent Islam in Southeast Asia, he wrote, "Some anthropologists hold that Islam arrived in southern Philippines at the end of the 14th century, but they differ on the manner it was introduced. This was a peaceful invasion of Arabian merchants and teachers who intermarried with the families of local rulers. Before the coming of Spain, bringing with it the cross and the sword, the whole archipelago was already controlled and managed by well-organized, civilized, and well-recognized busy Islamic states. The Sultanate of Sulu, the Sultanate of Maguindanao and Buayan, and the Kingdom of Manila.
And you notice that from 1380, when Karimul Makdum came, to 1521, when Magellan discovered the Philippines, that's about 141 years. That's more than 1 century. There was no war between Muslims who were propagating Islam and the people who were receiving Islam and accepting Islam, which proves to us, one sense for all, that the spread of Islam in the country was not by virtue of sword, but it was by virtue of the intellectual capacity and power of the Islamic teachings that were adopted by the early natives of the Philippines, who then became Muslims themselves.
On the 20th of September 1519, commissioned by Carlos I of Spain, Ferdinand Magellan left from Sanlúcar, Spain, cruising around the Cape of Good Hope on to the southern tip of Africa and then west around South America through the twisting passage bearing his name, the Strait of Magellan. On March 17, 1521, they spotted the island of Samar, which they named the Las Islas de San Lázaro, stopped briefly at the islet of Homonhon, and then disembarked at Limasawa, another islet south of Leyte. At Limasawa, Magellan celebrated the first Catholic Mass in the Philippines on March 31st, 1521. The first confrontation. The conquest or conversion of the various islands began, except the island of Mactan, whose chieftain Lapu-Lapu preferred fire and blood instead of miserable submission to Christianity. He flatly refused to give even an inch of his land or to compromise his freedom. According to Sulu oral tradition, Lapu-Lapu was a Muslim chieftain also known as Caliph Pulaka. In 1541, Antonio de Mendoza, the first colonial administrator of the New World, commissioned Ruy López de Villalobos the expedition to Las Islas de Poniente, or now known as the Philippines. Upon reaching the shores of Samar, Leyte, and parts of Mindanao, 1543, he named the islands Las Islas de Filipinas in honor of King Felipe II. Felipe II ascended the throne and made it an official policy to colonize the Philippines. He ordered Miguel López de Legazpi to proceed to the Philippines and to make it a permanent colony of Spain. In November 1564, the expedition under Legazpi left Mexico. Accompanying him as chief advisor and navigator was Fray Andres de Urdaneta, a scholar priest.
From 1521, when Magellan came here, and up to 1570s, when the Spanish forces reached Manila at the time, they were surprised to find out that the whole of Mindanao were already ruled under the Muslim Sultanate system. To their surprise, they found out that there were already principalities governed and ruled by Muslim leaders themselves. So you have the Kingdom of Silobong, which is actually sometimes called Kingdom of Kota Silobong, now Manila, under Sulaiman I, Raja Sulaiman I. And you have Lakandula, who was also the rich head of Tondo, and all others already professing Islam and at the same time demonstrating very strong opposition and resistance against the Spanish entry into the area. So in the 15th century, you have now Luzon, you have Visayas, and all of Mindanao already becoming Muslim communities.
Two important points in history. 1. The first group of people whom the Spaniards in 1570 called Moros were those in Manila and environs, and not the Islamized natives in Mindanao and Sulu. 2. The first Moro-Spanish War was not fought in the soils of Mindanao and Sulu, but right in what is now metropolitan Manila. At the famous Battle of Bangkusay off Tondo's shore on June 3, 1571, Raja Sulaiman, the last Tagalog martyr of Manila in defense of Islam against Spanish invasion, perished under the hands of Martin de Goiti. In a threatening voice, the fearless Raja Sulaiman made his stand clear on the issue of foreign policy. We wish to be the friends of all nations, but they must understand that we cannot tolerate any abuse. On the contrary, we will repay with death the least thing that touches our honor. Bold and piercing and true to his words, reminiscent of the Islamic slogan of all ages, victory or martyrdom. Raja Sulaiman, the last Muslim ruler of Manila, preferred martyrdom than to submit to the Spanish subjugation. After the fall of Manila, all resistance to Spanish rule except those fought in Mindoro in 1574 and the so-called aborted Magat Salamat conspiracy in 1587 had died down entirely in Luzon and the Visayas within a brief span of just 11 years. The Spanish invaders now became the new masters, not just for one barangay or confederation of barangays, but for the entire islands of Luzon and Visayas. This was the open declaration of war by Spain against the Moros of Mindanao and Sulu. As a matter of fact, this was the official beginning of the Moro-Spanish War, which was to drag on until Spain was ejected from the Philippines by the Americans in 1898. This was to last 327 years.
So Spain tried herself to get into the area to dominate because Luzon was already under Spanish yoke, and Visayas was also generating so much already support for Spanish sovereignty. And they wanted to get into the area of Mindanao. But Sulu was the main problem. Because at that time, there was already a prosperous economic trade relationship between the Sultanate of Sulu through the port of Jolo. Jolo was an international port which was engaged in international trading.
The instructions of Governor General Francisco de Sande to Captain Esteban Rodriguez de Figueroa on the siege of Sulu in June 1578 and Mindanao in April 1596 were the following. You shall order them that there be not among them any more preachers of the doctrines of Mahoma, since it is evil and false, and that of the Christian alone is good. And because we have been in these islands so short a time, the Lord of Mindanao has been deceived by the preachers of Borneo, and the people have become Moros. You shall tell them that our object is that he be converted to Christianity, and that he must allow us freely to preach the law of the Christian. And the natives must be allowed to go to hear the preaching and be converted without receiving harm from their chiefs. And you shall try to ascertain who are the preachers of the sect of Mahoma, and shall burn and destroy the house where that accursed doctrine has been preached, and you shall see that it be not rebuilt. On the 1st of April 1596, Figueroa left for Mindanao with 50 war vessels, 214 Spaniards, and 1,500 native allies. The fleet reached the mouth of Pulangi, or what the Spaniards called Rio Grande de Mindanao. They landed at Tampakan, and Figueroa lined up his troops in battle array and delivered a stirring speech. Soldiers of Felipe, we stand upon the newest soil of Spain. To subdue this dark forest and rid the soil of the infidel Muslim is our aim. They submit as vassals and converts or fall before the Spanish blades. Forward to our duty for king and country.
¡Viva España! ¡Viva España! ¡Viva España! ¡Viva España! ¡Viva España!
The jungles of Cotabato shook with the fierce battle that followed. Leading the Maguindanao warriors were the brothers Raja Silongan and Dato Ubal. Figueroa was cleft into two by a campilan wielded by Dato Ubal.
The bones of Captain Esteban Rodriguez de Figueroa are still deep inside the soils of Maguindanao along the Pulangi when he was killed by Raja Silungan and Dato Ubal.
In 1599, the Moros, aware that defensive war was leading to defeat, decided to bring the war over into the enemy territory and staged counterattacks. This was what hostile writers fondly called Moro piracy. The reprisal scheme was to cripple the enemy power base, exact tribute, and to take advantage of the critical situation faced by Spain due to the threat posed by the Dutch. One of these raids occurred in Dulag Leyte in 1603, where a Jesuit priest, Padre Melchor Hurtado, was captured by Dato Buisan in Maguindanao. In another raid in 1627, a Sulu fleet of more than 30 boats of various sizes and about 2,000 men, personally led by Sultan Bungsu, attacked the Spanish shipyard Indalupaon, Pasacao, Camarines Sur. The crucial point in the history of the Moros came in 1619, when Sultan Muhammad di Patuan Kudarat ascended the throne of the Maguindanao Sultanate. Succeeding his father in 1619, he conquered several datus and made himself the master of the Pulangi area. He controlled the present-day Cagayan de Oro and Caraga territories and made Misamis and Bukidnon his tributaries. Sultan Muhammad di Patuan Kudarat, the 7th Sultan of Maguindanao, was a direct descendant of Sharif Kabungsuan, and he was born in 1580. He was gifted with the exquisite qualities of a great leader. He was intelligent, religious, decisive, kind, and just.
My latest book on the birth of this armed struggle to MILF speaks about the movement of people and ideas. And so this leads us to persona. So you identify a persona. In that identity that we are talking about, individual or collective that you asked about. So you look for heroes. You look for a persona who can represent the ideals. So Kudarat is picked as the persona that signifies it. We are in the elementary grades taught only about Rizal, about Novini, about Bonifacio, General Luna, and so on, which is of the 1896 vintage, the Philippine Revolution against Spain. But though we have been struggling against colonials, we can identify heroes. Kudarat is only one of them, but the most famous. This figure of Kudarat emulates also the adherence to institution. It became a very powerful sultanate.
Holding Spain at bay for half a century and outlasting at least 8 governor-generals, he was regarded as providentially created to punish the bad Spaniards. He was able to negotiate with the Dutch and the Spaniards so that they recognize his sovereignty over these lands. The Spaniards tried but failed to conquer him in all battles. Spaniards were systematically defeated and forced to ransom their soldiers from the Sultan. Represented by the Jesuit missionary, signed a treaty with Sultan Kudarat on June 24, 1645, which allowed Spanish missionaries to minister to the needs of the Christians in Mindanao, even allowed a church built, and trade was allowed in the Sultan's territories. This was known as the Kudarat-Lopez Treaty.
Nagkaroon ng treaty, peace agreement between Kudarat at saka the Spaniards. The one who signed the peace treaty for Spain was a Jesuit, si Lopez, and of course, the Sultan himself, Sultan Kudarat. That was a very good move on the part of Sultan Kudarat because at that time, the Spaniards were intriguing the people of Buayan, who was in conflict with Sultan Kudarat. And Sultan Kudarat had to subdue them in order to consolidate his realm so as to be effective yung kanyang resistance against the Spaniards, magkaroon ng unity among the Muslims here, the Moros here, and he could effectively fight the Spaniards. During the lull, during the ceasefire, he was able to consolidate his hold over the people here in Maguindanao and Buayan.